Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for April 6th, 2022. Well, Global Britain is taking the lead now in a campaign to destroy Russia and in the process destroy any pretense to the existence of international law. Instead, we're seeing the reality of the rules-based order, a set of beliefs held by the leaders of the transatlantic world, namely the U.S. and the British, that they have a right to trample on any aspect of international law that protects other countries. The only narrative allowed is that of the U.S. and the British, and at this point, it's aimed at the total destruction of Russia, out of fear that the Russian and Chinese initiatives to protect their sovereignty will create the basis for a new financial system outside of the control of London and Wall Street. That's the issue here. So let's take a look at what happened at the UN Security Council yesterday. The country currently presiding over the UN Security Council is Great Britain. And the British Ambassador Barbara Woodward yesterday presided over a session designed to tar the Russians with the charge of war crimes. Not to investigate, not to initiate an investigation. As Scott Ritter said, and Scott Ritter is a top official of investigating chemical weapons and worked for the organization to prevent the use of chemical weapons. He's a very well-known figure, a whistleblower. And what Ritter said is, before you make accusations, do an investigation, present the evidence. Let people see that before you assume that someone is guilty. Well, yesterday's session started with the assumption that since Russia is bad, they must be guilty. They used the charge of war crimes in the city of Bucha, a suburb of Kiev. Now, this should be investigated. But the Russians are also saying that it should be investigated under the United Nations. Instead, what Woodward said is that it's going to be investigated by the Ukrainian Prosecutor General. In other words, you have the supposed independent investigation done by one of the parties making the claims. At the same time, the UN is not pushing for peace talks. The whole argument is to blame Russia. Yesterday, Zelensky briefed the UN Security Council in blood-curdling terms, saying that the UN and the UN Security Council are providing no security to Ukraine. Now, the Russians have called for an investigation of Ukrainian war crimes, atrocities committed by Ukrainian soldiers on captured Russian soldiers. That was rejected. That's not going on. They've also issued a call to investigate, and this goes back many years, the actual genocide of the 14,000 people who died in the Donbass fighting, the vast majority of which are ethnic Russian civilians. Again, where's the investigation into that? It's been shut down, or it was never even initiated. Now, meanwhile, what else is underway? Well, there's a move to expel Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. So they'll not even be able to challenge the evidence that's presented against them. More than 100 Russian diplomats and diplomatic staff were expelled yesterday from Germany, Italy, and Denmark. The Germans said it's because they're working against the freedom of the German people. Well, how do you have negotiations and discussion if you expel diplomats? There's a NATO foreign ministers meeting taking place today, which will include representatives from Australia, Japan, and South Korea. In other words, the moves toward establishing an Asian NATO for purposes of bolstering the campaign against Russia, but also expanding the drive to contain China. The idea that you have the Asian Pacific partners of NATO brought in, well, one of the leading countries they were targeting was India, to bring India into this. But the Indians do not want to be part of a bloc. They do not want to be part of this NATO attack on Russia. So keep your eyes open for new attacks on India, which will be coming shortly. as a U.S. representative, Singh, told the Indians that if they try to help Russia, there will be consequences for India. Now, at the same time, they're moving for more sanctions. And this push is led by Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. They're moving to prevent Russia from having any contact, even any use of ports, any facilities in other countries, any ability to trade. The U.S. Treasury yesterday announced that they will allow no more payments on Russian debt and Russian bonds, imposing a total freeze on the $300 billion being held of Russia's money in U.S. banks. Now, this is what we said the Great Reset is all about. Total control over what's done with spending. If you can take $300 billion from Russia and freeze it, what can a bank do to your account, your checking account, your savings account, if you're on the wrong side of this global order? So that's what we're looking at now in terms of the escalation against Russia. While these diplomatic moves, or I should say undiplomatic moves, are underway, they're pumping more weapons in. There's more talk of establishing permanent bases for NATO in Eastern Europe, staffed by American soldiers. There's the request of the Polish Vice Prime Minister for NATO nuclear weapons to be deployed to Poland. So this is becoming increasingly dangerous. Now, one thing that was not addressed by the UN yesterday was a report which said there are now 325 million people in the world living on the edge of starvation. What's the line from the UN? Blame Russia. Well, let's take a look at what the U.S. policy is on this. The American Farm Bureau, responding to the crisis, asked for exemptions from the Conservation Reserve Program, which is run under the U.S. Department of Agriculture, to keep a certain amount of land fallow, not planting it, as part of the efforts to cut back on food production. Some of this has a green agenda, some of it has an agenda to enable the cartels to raise prices and so on. Well, the American Farm Bureau said, look, there's global hunger. We need to move ahead with spring planting now to address this problem. Typical of American farmers who represent a true American morality. As long as they can plant, they're willing to do so to save lives. The Biden administration said, no, you will not plant on this land, condemning more people to starvation. Now, that's what we're dealing with in the West, a lawless operation run under the motto of the rules-based order. Now, this is what we're going to be addressing this weekend. The Schiller Institute Conference is bringing together an extremely impressive list of speakers, and we'll put a link at the bottom of this description so you can look at it. But former ambassadors, former government officials, the present Russian ambassador to the United States is scheduled to address the conference. Helga Zepp-LaRouche will be giving a keynote, and I will be presiding over panel 2, which is on the economy, and possibly as well on the third panel, which is on security. The topic we're taking up is establishing a new security and financial architecture that protects the security of every nation, every sovereign nation, and as well ensures economic policies not that benefit the banks and the 1% of the world's richest people, but which represent the future for the whole of humanity, including the potential for a larger population. This is something which is being attacked by the current Malthusian genocidalists who are pointing the finger at Russia and saying Russia's committing genocide. So if you wish to be a part of reversing this hypocrisy and this murderous policy, because the hypocrisy is a cover for murder, if you wish to be a part of turning it back, join us on this Saturday, April 9th, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern Time for a Schiller Institute conference. The link to register is at the bottom of the page. I hope I'll see you there. It's online, so I won't see you, but you can see me and the other speakers that we have. and get your friends to watch as well. Thanks for joining me. Let's win this fight.